I'd squash that Bruce Lee fellow like a bug if he ever had the courage to face real competition. Those words came from Barbara Big Bear Morrison, the 275-pound WWE Women's World Champion, during a live television interview in Chicago. 45 seconds later, she was tapping out on the canvas, desperately slapping the mat 3 times as 18,000 wrestling fans sat in stunned silence. What happened in those 45 seconds didn't just shock the wrestling world. It redefined what everyone thought they knew about size, strength, and the impossible. This is the story of the night a bug made a giant tap out, and why Barbara's coach still refuses to discuss it 50 years later. Chicago, Illinois, October 17, 1970. The WWE had organized something unprecedented. Worlds Collide, a cross-promotional exhibition featuring wrestling champions against fighters from other combat disciplines. The main attraction was Barbara Morrison, and for good reason. At 27 years old, she was a phenomenon. 6 feet tall, 275 pounds of farm, raised Minnesota strength with a personality as large as her frame. She had dominated women's wrestling for 3 consecutive years without losing a single match. Barbara wasn't just big, she was legitimately, dangerously strong. Growing up on a dairy farm, lifting hay bales and wrestling cattle had translated into functional power that made her genuinely feared in the ring. Her signature move, the bear hug crush, had sent 5 opponents to the hospital with cracked ribs. Her arms measured 21 inches around, larger than most professional male bodybuilders. When Barbara spoke, the wrestling world listened. Bruce Lee was in Chicago filming a television commercial for a watchmaker when the WWE promoter approached him with an unusual offer. "We want you to participate in the exhibition as a representative of martial arts," the promoter explained. "You'd face Barbara in a submission only match with no striking allowed." The promoter leaned forward. "She's been calling out martial artists in interviews, claiming that wrestling is superior to all other fighting systems and that size always defeats technique. She's been saying some pretty dismissive things about martial arts, specifically about smaller fighters." Bruce wasn't particularly interested until the promoter showed him footage of Barbara's recent interview on Chicago television. The interviewer had asked her opinion on martial arts, and Barbara had laughed dismissively. "Those kung fu guys do their little movie kicks and hand chops, but put them in a real wrestling ring with a real athlete, and they'd last about 10 seconds before crying for mercy." She leaned back in her chair, supremely confident. "I'd squash that Bruce Lee fellow like a bug if he ever had the courage to face real competition. He's what, 130 pounds? I've wrestled bulls bigger than him on my family farm. It would be embarrassing for him." Honestly? Bruce called the WWE promoter back within an hour. He accepted the challenge under specific conditions. The match would follow legitimate submission wrestling rules with a qualified referee, no predetermined outcome, and all proceeds from his appearance would go to Chicago Children's Hospital. The promoter eagerly agreed, sensing that the controversy and publicity would sell out the stadium regardless of the outcome. He was right. Within 3 days, every ticket was sold, with scalpers getting triple face value outside the venue. The local newspapers ran daily coverage with headlines like "Movie Star Faces Wrestling Giant" and "David versus Goliath in Chicago Stadium." The weigh-in took place the day before in downtown Chicago hotel room packed with sports journalists and photographers. Barbara arrived first, looking even more imposing in person than on television. She wore a custom wrestling singlet that showed off arms thicker than most men's legs and a back so broad she had to turn sideways to fit through standard doorways. When she stepped on the scale, it registered exactly 275 pounds. She flexed for the cameras, and the room fell silent. Her biceps were massive, 21 inches around, rivaling professional male bodybuilders. The crowd murmured appreciatively at her obvious physical dominance. Bruce arrived 30 minutes later, wearing simple black pants and a white shirt, looking almost fragile next to the assembled wrestlers and photographers. When he stepped on the scale, it showed 140 pounds. Barbara outweighed him by 135 pounds, nearly doubling his body weight. A journalist shouted from the crowd, "Bruce, how do you plan to compete against someone twice your size?" Bruce smiled calmly. Weight is just one variable in combat. Leverage, timing, and understanding of human anatomy are equally important. I respect Barbara's strength, but strength without technical knowledge has exploitable weaknesses. Barbara stepped forward, towering over Bruce by 8 inches, and spoke loud enough for all the microphones to capture. "Let me make this very clear, little man. Tomorrow night, I'm going to wrap you up like a pretzel, squeeze you until you can't breathe, and make you tap out so fast your movie director friends won't even have time to yell cut." She leaned closer. "This isn't choreographed cinema. This is real wrestling, and you're about to learn the difference between movie fighting and actual combat." She extended her massive hand for the traditional stare-down handshake. Bruce took it, noting her grip strength was substantial but not insurmountable, and maintained eye contact without flinching. The photographers captured the moment, the size difference shocking even in still images. October 17th arrived with unusual October warmth for Chicago. By evening, Chicago Stadium was packed beyond capacity with 18,000 fans, creating a deafening atmosphere. The preliminary matches had warmed up the crowd, but everyone was waiting for the main event. Barbara's entrance came first, accompanied by her signature country music theme and pyrotechnics. She walked down the aisle, accepting cheers from wrestling fans who appreciated her authentic toughness and genuine athletic ability. She climbed into the ring, raised her arms, and the entire stadium shook with approval. Bruce's entrance was simpler, but created an equally strong reaction. He walked to the ring in traditional black martial arts pants and no shirt, revealing his famously defined physique that looked almost anatomical in its muscular definition, despite weighing less than 140 pounds. The contrast when he entered the ring was almost comical. Barbara looked like she could physically pick him up and throw him into the third row. Veteran wrestling journalist Mike Terrell, covering the event ringside, later wrote, "I've been reporting on wrestling for 15 years, and I've never seen a more obvious mismatch." Barbara Morrison looked like a fully grown grizzly bear standing next to a house cat. The smart money was on her, winning in under a minute. The referee, a former Olympic wrestling judge, brought in specifically for credibility, called both competitors to the center of the ring and explained the rules one final time. "This is a submission-only match. No striking, no biting, no eye gouging. You can use any grappling technique from any discipline. Match ends with verbal submission or 3 taps on the mat." "Understood." Both competitors nodded. The referee positioned them in neutral starting stances, about 6 feet apart, and raised his hand. "Fighters ready. Begin." Barbara immediately shot forward with surprising speed for her size, attempting to close distance and use her weight advantage. She had trained specifically for this match with her coach, developing a strategy to overwhelm Bruce with pure physical pressure before he could establish any technical position. Her plan was simple: grab him, take him down, mount him, and crush him until he submitted. It was a sound strategy against most opponents, and it had worked flawlessly throughout her championship reign. Bruce moved laterally, avoiding the initial charge while staying light on his feet and maintaining perfect balance. Barbara adjusted quickly, cutting off the ring angle and forcing Bruce toward the corner. She lunged again, this time getting her hands on Bruce's shoulders and attempting to drive him backward into the turnbuckle. The crowd roared, sensing the beginning of the expected domination. But Bruce, instead of resisting the forward pressure, suddenly dropped his weight and shifted his hips in a technique borrowed from judo, using Barbara's own momentum against her mass. The result was Barbara stumbling forward past Bruce, her 275 pounds of committed force continuing in the direction she had intended, but without the resistance she expected. She caught herself on the ropes, turned quickly, and came at Bruce again with more caution. The crowd's roar had changed from excitement to curiosity. Why hadn't Bruce been flattened yet? Barbara tried a different approach, circling and looking for an opening to establish her preferred bear hug position where her strength advantage would be overwhelming. She feinted left, then drove right, successfully grabbing Bruce around the waist and lifting him completely off the ground in her signature bear hug. The crowd exploded, certain this was the beginning of the end. Barbara squeezed with everything she had, expecting to hear Bruce gasp for air and tap out within seconds. But Bruce had prepared for exactly this scenario, having studied Barbara's matches and understanding that her bear hug was her primary weapon. Instead of fighting the squeeze or trying to break the grip through strength, Bruce did something Barbara had never encountered in her wrestling career. Using a principle from Wing Chun called sinking the weight, Bruce relaxed his upper body completely while driving his hips downward and spreading his base, making himself suddenly much heavier than his 140 pounds suggested. Simultaneously, he positioned his arms in a specific way that created space despite Barbara's crushing pressure, maintaining breathing room through structural positioning rather than muscular resistance. Barbara squeezed harder, her face reddening with effort. But Bruce remained conscious and controlled, waiting for the exact right moment. That moment came at the 30-second mark when Barbara, frustrated that her best weapon wasn't working, slightly adjusted her grip to get better leverage. In that microsecond of transition, Bruce executed a complex sequence of movements he had practiced thousands of times. He shifted his weight suddenly forward while rotating his hips, creating an angle that compromised Barbara's base. Then, using a jiu-jitsu principle of lever mechanics combined with a Wing Chun concept of borrowed force, he guided Barbara's overcommitted mass into a rolling motion. What happened next shocked everyone in the stadium. Barbara, despite being 135 pounds heavier and significantly stronger, found herself being rolled through a technique that used her own crushing pressure against her balance. Within 2 seconds, their positions had completely reversed. Bruce was now behind Barbara, who was face down on the canvas with Bruce's legs wrapped around her torso and his arm positioned under her chin in what martial artists call a rear naked choke, but what jiu-jitsu practitioners recognize as a properly applied blood choke targeting the carotid arteries. Barbara, experienced in wrestling, but not in submission grappling defense against someone who had studied the technique at the highest level, immediately felt the pressure on her neck and the restriction of blood flow to her brain. She tried to stand up, using her significant strength advantage to simply power out of the position. But Bruce's leg position and hip control made it mechanically impossible for her to generate the leverage needed. She tried to roll, but Bruce's body moved with hers, maintaining the position perfectly. She reached back, trying to grab his head or break his grip, but his positioning made him unreachable. The pressure increased, not from muscular strength, but from precise positioning that allowed Bruce's entire body structure to generate force through optimal leverage. Barbara's vision started to narrow, the telltale sign of reduced blood flow to the brain. She had perhaps 3 more seconds before she would lose consciousness completely. Her coach was screaming from ringside, but she couldn't process the words. Her survival instinct took over. She slapped the mat once, twice, 3 times. Tap out. Submission. 45 seconds. The referee immediately signaled the end of the match, and Bruce released the hold instantly, helping Barbara sit up to ensure she recovered safely. The stadium was silent for a heartbeat before erupting into absolute chaos. Half the crowd was cheering in disbelief. The other half was booing in disappointment. Everyone was standing because what they had just witnessed contradicted everything they thought they knew about size and strength in combat. Barbara sat on the canvas breathing heavily, her hand on her neck, staring at nothing in particular. She had trained her entire life, had never lost a match, and had been submitted in 45 seconds by someone she outweighed by 135 pounds. Bruce extended his hand to help her stand. She looked at it for a moment, then took it and pulled herself up. The respect was genuine on both sides. The post-match interview in the ring captured Barbara's honest reaction. "I don't understand what just happened. I had him in my bear hug, my best move, and somehow, I don't know. He did something and suddenly he was behind me. And then I couldn't breathe, and I had to tap out or pass out. That wasn't wrestling. That was something else entirely." Bruce's response was characteristically educational rather than boastful. "Barbara is incredibly strong. Stronger than anyone I've ever grappled with. But strength alone cannot overcome proper technique and positioning. What I used was a combination of jiu-jitsu submission grappling and Wing Chun body mechanics. It's not about being stronger, it's about being more efficient with the strength you have." October 17, 1970, Chicago Stadium, 18,000 witnesses. 45 seconds that changed Barbara Morrison's perspective on combat forever. That night taught her that size isn't everything, that technique can overcome strength, and that there's always more to learn. The experience influenced Barbara to spend the next 2 years studying submission, grappling to add to her wrestling foundation. She went on to defend her WWE championship 4 more times before retiring in 1973, and she always credited the Bruce Lee match as the most valuable 45 seconds of her athletic career. Bruce donated his appearance fee to Chicago Children's Hospital as promised, and never publicly discussed the match again, considering it a simple demonstration of technique rather than a personal achievement worth celebrating. But for everyone who witnessed it, those 45 seconds proved something profound, that assumptions about size and strength can be shattered in less than a minute. That respect is earned through action, and that sometimes the smallest person in the room carries the biggest lesson. The bug had indeed made its mark, not by being squashed, but by proving that, in the right circumstances, even the mightiest giants can learn humility. Sometimes the most powerful victories come not from crushing your opponent, but from earning their respect.